Hello, sorry for the delay. Yesterday I had some technical difficulties, and then today I was watching the George Floyd memorial and funeral service. Oh my gosh, what a shame. So sad, the entire thing. And so I wanted to put his name up there so we could remember him. And then also today I wanted to finish talking about some of that introduction things that I had brought up. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about unemployment. And by the way, you may have noticed that there was another 1.8 million jobs lost that they filed for this week. And so that brings the total up to around 40 million that have filed for unemployment. But then also this week, people should start going back. But tomorrow we'll get the May unemployment report. It comes out on the first Friday of the month. And so watch for that and see what those numbers are. There's talk that it's going to be 15 or 16%, maybe even 20%, which of course is an unbelievable number, especially considering 3 months ago it was at 3.5%, but that's what pandemics do to you. And so I'll check in with you on that on Monday, or maybe send something out tomorrow about checking the unemployment rate. And of course, the unemployment rate was man-made, that we decided to do that, and so it's much different than what we would be talking about. It was just like a normal economic recession. So some of the other things that I had listed in Module 1 that I thought I would just cover for a minute. One of them, and when you get a chance, take a look at the video on Vox, and it talks about, with history, what happened in World War II and the casualties in war of sailors and soldiers. And so when you watch that, you'll see like the unbelievable number of casualties that took place in the war. And they go through United States casualties, UK casualties, France, Poland, and then they get to German and Russian, and then of course the numbers are even more staggering. And so my question when it comes to history, and when you're looking at history through the eyes of political science, is, are politicians learning from history? Do they understand like things that have happened, and are they going to do something about it? And if you think about like what happened with World War II, did we learn something from it? And didn't appear so, because just 5 years later we were in the Korean War. And so we thought we were going to have another war to end all wars, and then 5 years later in the Korean War. And then, battling not only in Korea, but also support from China and Russia. And we didn't learn anything again, and we were in the Vietnam War. And of course, we've had many other wars since then. And so does history teach us something? Do we learn from history? And of course, there are times that we do, but maybe in that particular instance, we didn't. And that also does certainly happen regularly with governments, where somebody decides that somebody else isn't doing the right thing, and we go to war. The other thing that I've got listed in the module is geography, and what I actually put in there for geography was the electoral votes that took place in 2016. And if you go back and take a look at any of the electoral votes going back to many years ago, you'll see that of course there's this divide, especially if you take a look at the southern states and take a look at the northeastern states, Illinois, and the West Coast states, where it's pretty much always either Republican votes in the southern states and Democrat votes in the Northeast, Illinois, and in the western states. And so that's one of those things where you're like, is it something in the geography that's making people, or that has people voting a certain way? And certainly if you think of like the southern states and maybe the plain states where they generally vote Republican, you can think of maybe they're more Christian, or their group, or the Christian faith that they do belong to are going to be Christian faiths that are more conservative. And so that may be part of it. And then if you think of in those other states, let's say a state like Illinois, you've got a big city, you've got unions, you've got more liberal thought, and so maybe that's why. And as a matter of fact, if you take a look back at some of the old or some of the electoral votes over the past years, since 1992, Illinois has voted Democrat in every presidential election. So since 1992. So think of like how many times the Illinois has already changed over, and we've had new elections, and we're voting Democrat every time. And so certainly that's the case for some of the southern states and some of the plain states too, where they generally only vote Republican. And so geography, and then if you even took a look at, other countries, there's this north and south divide that oftentimes happens. Oftentimes the industrial north and the maybe agricultural south. And so those things are going to play a role also. Sociology. When you take a look at sociology, you're thinking of like group thought. Like, how do certain groups vote? Are senior citizens going to vote a certain way? Are, I don't know, people with a lot of money going to vote a certain way? And so those things are group thought within these groups. Do African Americans vote a certain way? They sure do. African Americans vote primarily, overwhelmingly Democrat. Is there a group that votes primarily, overwhelmingly Republican? If you were going to hang your hat on a group that you wanted to help you get elected if you're a Republican, it would be white men, especially between the ages of 45 and 75. And that's going to be the best group for you to know that you can get votes from if you're a Republican. And so those are things that if you think about it in like group terms, what are certain groups thinking, and what way will certain groups vote? What way will certain groups look at individual issues? Certainly, if you think about what's going on with the violence and the protest, there's certain people are going to look at those protests as something that needs to be done, and there's going to be certain people who look at those protests as something that's being overblown. And so those are things that are going to be part of those group thoughts. Senior citizens looking at things certain ways, kids looking at things certain ways, women versus men. And so all of those things are sociological groups that you can sort of put into different categories. Of course, they're not all going to vote a certain way. They're not all going to think the same way, but it's something to take into consideration. And then psychology, and in psychology, I put the video in that would link you to psychology to think of like, what makes a leader? What is it that like psychologically makes somebody a leader? How is it that somebody's able to like grab control of somebody? How is it that somebody's able to sort of influence others to vote for them or influence others to follow them? And so that's one of those things, like even if you think of somebody like Hitler, who was, so crazy as far as his thoughts, but he had all these people following him. So how is it that they're able to get people to follow them? And then what is it that leads people to decide that they wanted to get into politics? Are they like hungry for power? Is it that they want to be in the limelight? What is it that like brings them into the area where they want to be either in politics or in government some way or another? And so those are things that when you're looking at psychology, you have to think about it. I put the link in there to watch the video about how people come into power, and so take a look at that, and specifically The Prince by Machiavelli is what we're discussing in there. And in The Prince, they talk about you need to be able to make sure that you control your population, that you control the people. And so there's times that you have to be ruthless to make sure that you keep your power. And then there's other times that you have to be compassionate, is what the Prince was saying. But if you have to be ruthless, that's the way it goes to be able to maintain your power. And so what people are able to do that, and I refer back to somebody like Barack Obama, who, community organizer, ran for a couple of seats, became a U.S. Senator, and then was put into the position of having to make worldwide decisions that were going to impact millions of people, and he was the final say. And if you think back to when the United States went after Osama bin Laden, finally the decision came down to Barack Obama deciding whether or not we were going to send our U.S. military into Pakistan illegally, basically, into a sovereign country and say that we're going to take out this Osama bin Laden, assuming that he's at this compound. And so talk about somebody who's like, maybe life wasn't prepared for something like that, hadn't been in the military, and now you're making this decision that you're going to go after it. And if you read back on it, many people in his cabinet, including Joe Biden, was opposed to it. So certainly that's like one of the things where if you think about how people decide to get into politics, how people decide to manage power, and whether or not, or what they will do to stay in power. So that's a little bit about that as far as our introduction goes. And so make sure to read the module and then sort of go through those videos that'll help you kind of understand what I'm talking about with these things. Couple of, just quick housekeeping things. I know several people have asked me questions. The weekly paper, you can email it to me or you can submit it on Blackboard. And those are due by Friday each week. You can hand them in any day. There's 8 of them that are due. And then the discussion questions, those you can just email to me. And by the way, I said you could text those things to me also. And so if you want to text those to me, and 8 of those are due, and they're due on Friday also. And so that's at least the things that we need to do to get started. And then we'll have the term paper coming up. And like I said, try to take some notes of things that I talk about in the when I'm doing these videos, and then also certainly take some notes of things that I put on online as far as those modules go. So that's all. I might check in tomorrow. If not, have a great weekend, and then I'll for sure have a new video posted by Monday. Take care.